Welcome to the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh's 2025 Affordable Housing Program, or AHP Involuntary Housing Grant Initiative webinar. My name is Rhiannon Haller, Manager of Affordable Housing, and I'm here to give you the information needed to apply for the Federal Home Loan, or FHL Bank's 2025 AHP Involuntary Housing Grant Initiative subsidy. And because AHP is highly competitive, provide you with the resources to better understand our scoring priorities and the resources that FHL Bank makes available to you to submit a successful application. Here is today's agenda. The focus is on our scoring priorities and required documentation, feasibility, which is an important component of our review of your application, our voluntary housing grant initiative, and key dates for you to mark, the most important of which is August 7th at 5 p.m., which is when the applications are due. Before we begin discussing AHP, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh is one of 11 banks established under the Federal Home Loan Bank Act of 1932. Our purpose is to increase the availability of credit for residential mortgage lending, as well as investment in housing and community development. Each FHL bank is independently owned and operated, privately capitalized, and organized as cooperative. The FHL bank system is comprised of over 6,000 member institutions nationwide, and we at FHL Bank Pittsburgh serve 284 members chartered in our district of Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Our members borrow from FHL Bank when they need liquidity, and through this lending to our members, we generate earnings, some of which are used to fund our community investment products. All of our products are funded solely by the activity of our members, do not use any tax dollars. We'll be covering AHP as well as the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative in depth today, but we want to make sure you're all aware of our other community investment products. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to someone on our team to connect further. The products on the left are mandated by statute. The products on the right are considered voluntary and are approved by our board of directors. Members of FHL Bank Pittsburgh have access to all of these products. The first program I'd like to mention is First Front Door. FHL Bank is required by statute to contribute 10% of its pre-AHP income annually to fund the affordable housing program, and we set aside a portion of those for First Front Door to help qualified first-time homebuyers with down payments and closing costs. The community lending program provides low-cost advances to our members to support economic development, such as financing for small businesses, infrastructure, and community development projects located in low and moderate income census tracts. Moving over to our voluntary products on the right, Banking on Business and Banking on Business Inclusion and Equity Fund provides secondary loans to small businesses to spur economic development. Home for Good provides grants to projects, programs, and activities that support those who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. Funding is provided by FHL Bank and our three state housing finance agencies. Blueprint Communities is a program that provides local leaders the tools to develop a long-term revitalization strategy for the communities. The First Front Door Keys to Equity program, or KEYS, provides down payment and closing cost assistance to first-time minority home buyers and first-time, first-generation home buyers. More information on our community products can be found on our website, or if you'd like to discuss any of them, feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the FHL Bank team. FHL Bank Pittsburgh funds AHP with 10% of our pre-AHP income. It's the financing resources that help FHL Bank Pittsburgh member financial institutions partner with developers to create affordable homes in local communities. AHP is a competitive process where members partner with developers to submit an application through our AHP online portal. A project may request up to 1.5 million with a limit of 150,000 in AHP subsidy per unit. This year, we have about 57.5 million in AHP to award and an additional 17 million for the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative, which is for projects in our district of Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia only. There are two main components of the AHP process: pre and post award. We will cover in today's webinar the competitive application scoring categories and documentation required, as well as key information about feasibility. Not covered today, but very important to be aware of, is the post-award disbursement process and long-term compliance and monitoring requirements based on project type. Visit our website for more information. All projects that receive an award will be subject to minimum draw provisions. This is important to know as AHP is a reimbursement of costs incurred. For homeownership projects, disbursement occurs after the home is built and sold or rehabbed. For rental projects, at least a third of construction must be completed prior to requesting a disbursement. Make sure you take this requirement into account when planning any bridge or construction financing. Our FHL Bank Pittsburgh member financial institutions are crucial to AHP. You cannot submit an application to us without a member partner. It's really the AHP developer or the sponsor who completes the vast majority of the application, but members do have their own set of specific responsibilities. We are here to assist our members with any questions you may have about the AHP process from the member perspective. If you are a member and submitting an application this year, you must ensure you have access to AHP Online. Members must complete the final step of the submission process. Applications are due by 5 p.m. on August 7th this year, and we do not grant extensions to the submission deadline. Sponsors are also crucial to AHP. Project sponsors are responsible for ensuring that the member has agreed to partner before initiating an application, making sure that the application is completed in its entirety and that the member has enough time to complete their portion. It's important to make sure that somebody from your organization is available to answer any clarification questions you might have during the review period, and that questions are answered in a timely manner. If your project is awarded, the sponsor who is responsible for submitting funding requests, as well as maintaining application commitments throughout the project lifecycle and post-completion compliance period. Consultants do not have access to projects once they are awarded. Another important responsibility is executing and reporting subsidy retention agreements that secure the grant's affordability restrictions. Homeownership projects must use our real estate retention agreement. Rental projects must draft a security instrument, such as a mortgage and note, that incorporates our AHP or voluntary housing grant rider. You'll need to work with your member partner and legal counsel to prepare these. Many types of affordable housing projects can be eligible for AHP, and they can be located in rural communities or large cities. We funded homeless shelters, adaptive reuse of schools into apartment buildings, new construction of single family homes, and even tiny houses, for example. No matter the type, size, location, or scale, all projects must comply with the AHP income requirements. AHP funds can only go to support households at 80% or less of the area median income using HUD guidelines for the area where the project is located. For example, in 2025, a family of 4 in the Wilmington area in Delaware could have a household income of up to $95,500 per year and qualify for the program. Make sure to confirm the income limits for your area on HUD's website. This slide covers the important documents and resources that are available to you and located on our website. The most important being the AHP implementation plan. This document sets the requirements and policy behind the scoring and feasibility underwriting completed by FHL Bank. There are also other resources available to you, including guides and the forms for the application process. These are all available on our website. An overview of the application process is outlined here. You can begin to develop your application offline as a majority of the materials you need are available on our website. We do offer application assistance, where you can schedule time with a member of our staff to review any questions that you have about AHP or the voluntary housing grant. You will be able to submit a request for application assistance until May 23rd. Calls will take place until the funding round opens. The AHP system opens on June 26th, and applicants have until August 7th to submit their application. We then begin our review process and determine the awardees, which will be announced on December 11th. Scoring is key to AHP as we rank projects from highest to lowest score and allocate funds starting with the highest scoring projects until available funds are exhausted. We'll review all of the scoring categories, but are highlighting some changes from 2024 here. No new categories are added, but we remove the rental projects committed funds category and have increased points for other categories. Homeownership projects in low income minority areas can now receive 7 points. Projects that meet the special needs or homeless criteria can get up to 8 points for each of these categories, and projects located in Delaware will receive 9 points. Here is a summary of the scoring categories and the points associated so you can review your project, review the requirements in the implementation plan, and determine what your requested score may be. We will review each of these categories today on the webinar, but be sure to thoroughly review the AHP course, forms, and request application assistance. When you submit your application, you will answer questions, and those answers will determine your potential score. From there, we will review your answers and the documentation you submitted, compare it to the requirements in the implementation plan. We will either maintain your score or the application may lose points for one of two reasons. First, there is a problem with the documentation you submitted and it is not what was outlined as required in the implementation plan, or the project is not meeting the intent behind the scoring category. It is extremely important that everyone understands that you, as the applicant, must actively request the points in the AHP online system for applicable scoring categories. If you do not request the points, we do not award the points. When I say actively request, what I mean is that within AHP Online, the system will ask you, do you wish to be considered for XYZ points? You have to answer yes and answer additional questions in the system as well as upload any required documentation. If you answer no, that's fine if it isn't applicable to your project, but we will not double check and give you credit if you did not specifically request it. I'll now go over each scoring category. Projects may receive 5 points for donated property if acquired by one of the three ways. The only document eligible for consideration to support this requested category is the property conveyance form signed by an attorney and sponsor. You may ask for other documentation like a supporting deed or sales agreement, but without a properly executed property conveyance form, the project will not be considered for these points. 5 points may be awarded to projects that have integral involvement or ownership interest by a qualified organization such as a nonprofit or local housing authority. There's a specific form required for this category to be considered for points, and that is the sponsorship by qualifying organization form, which must be signed by the sponsor, an attorney, and the qualified organization if formed and different from the sponsor. Additional supporting documentation will be requested in AHP Online, such as an organization's 501c determination, partnership agreements, articles of incorporation, or other documentation to demonstrate the organization's qualified status. Applications may receive up to 20 points for targeting. More points are attributed to projects that reserve a higher number of units to households with lower incomes. There are different calculations for the score for homeownership versus rental projects. At application, no documentation is required except for projects that are rental rehabilitation. They're currently occupied, in which case you will have to submit your rent roll using our tenant income workbook. Income is one of the foundations of AHP. It's important to understand how and when to qualify. Our income guidelines are on our website. The times of determination of qualification are listed here on this slide by project type. Currently occupied rental projects may have different timing requirements for income qualification, depending on whether or not there is an approved relocation plan as part of the project. Reserving units for individuals facing homelessness is a scoring priority. Up to 8 points may be awarded to eligible projects. If 50% or more of units are reserved for homeless households, 8 points are awarded. If less than 50%, but above the minimum of 20% are reserved, then 4 points are awarded. At application, no documentation is required, but it will be required at disbursement or monitoring. Make sure you refer to our definition of homelessness in the implementation plan. Populations with special needs and or military veteran scoring category is structured similarly to housing for homeless populations category. The more units reserved for individuals with special needs or military veterans, the more points to a project. Either 4 or 8 points can be awarded based on the percentage reserved. No documentation is required at application, but will be required for applicable households at disbursement or monitoring. Make sure you refer to our definitions of this category in the implementation plan. Projects that have at least 75% of sites located in rural areas, as defined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, may be eligible for 5 points. There are specific documents required. Applicants with known sites have the choice of providing the certification form for all applicable site addresses signed by a USDA representative or using the USDA's website printout for each qualifying address. Projects with unknown sites committing to at least 75% ultimately qualifying as rural must provide the certification form. In an effort to support housing for the most cost burdened, rental projects that will reserve at least 20% of the project's total units for extremely low income households, which is 30% or less of the area median income, may receive 4 points. Documentation of income for the project is extremely important and will be requested at various times throughout the project's life cycle. Projects that not only provide housing but have expansive programs or services that empower the project's residents may receive up to 6 points. Applicants may request as many points as are applicable, but a maximum of 6 can be awarded. For each service the project will provide, a separate FHL Bank Empowerment Memorandum of Understanding is required. This MOU certifies that the sponsor and the service provider commit to the service for the residents. Projects that help to stabilize the community may receive up to 15 points. There are 6 different subcategories that make up this overarching scoring category. The first is community planning. 3 points may be awarded if the project has the majority of its sites, or 75%, located within the eligible plan's bounds and must meet targeted priorities as outlined within that plan. Plans must be approved or have been updated within 10 years. The community planning certification form is required to be submitted with the application. A project that is rehabilitating existing properties may receive 3 points. Owner occupied rehabilitation projects fit into this category. Other types of projects that may be considered eligible are rental rehab or for sale homeownership rehab, as long as at least 75% of units are rehabbed and the hard rehab cost must be greater than 25,000 per unit. This number is derived from the AHP financial feasibility workbook on the hard construction rehab cost line item within the cost breakout tab. No other documentation is required at application. If a property is of historic significance, as defined by the project state historical preservation office, 2 points may be awarded with a properly executed property of historic significance form. Project must also have hard rehabilitation costs per unit greater than 25,000. For any Pennsylvania project, please refer to our AHP application guide for Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office's form submission requirements. 5 points may be awarded to rental projects that are preserving existing subsidized housing. These projects must be within 2 years of permitted repayment, including expiration of the restricted use requirement. Preserved units must be at least 75% of the total project, and hard rehab costs must be greater than $10,000 per unit. The preservation of existing subsidized housing form is required to be signed by the project's original funders. Up to 10 points may be awarded for eligible projects that select this owner-occupied rehab category in the application. Rural owner-occupied rehab projects are eligible for 10 points, and other owner-occupied rehab projects are eligible for 8 points. Projects may receive points for both this category and the rehab existing properties category. While no documents are required for the owner-occupied rehab category, to be eligible for the 10 points, you must submit the required documentation for the rural category. Projects supporting a rental housing development may receive 5 points. Any rental project is eligible for this category, but you must actively request the points in AHP Online. They are not automatically awarded. For sale owner occupied and rental projects that have an affordability period of at least 30 years and include the required elements on this slide may be eligible for 5 points. Owner occupied projects must use a community land trust or other shared equity model. Rental projects must use a community land trust. You must upload the sustained affordability form applicable to your project type to certify these aspects. In an effort to support development in low income minority areas which have great affordable housing needs, projects may receive 4 points if located in a low income minority area as determined by FHL Bank Pittsburgh. At least 75% of the property census tracts must be located within eligible areas. A list of eligible tracts is available on our website. Please note that the list has changed from prior years to reflect the most annual census. Another requirement to be considered for points is that the project also must meet the community planning criteria under community stability, which was previously covered. Projects must actively request these points in AHP Online. The project should submit this to the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council or FFIEC verification of the project site census tract for all qualifying addresses from the year 2024 or 2025. It is important to select one of these years when pulling this information for each qualifying address to align with the census tracts in our list of eligible areas. For any sites unknown, sponsor must certify in HP Online that the project will meet these requirements. Refer to the track list on our website for some additional information on this category if FFIEC does not have accurate data. Projects that receive points for the low income minority area category and are creating new home ownership for sale opportunities in these qualified areas may receive 7 points. Rehab of existing owner occupied properties may receive 3 points. No documentation is not required for this specific category, but it will be driven based on your application type and the answers to the low income minority area scoring category. The next category we'll review is residential economic diversity, which allows for projects to request points if at least 75% of the project's properties are located in census tracts with a median family income greater than or equal to 100% of area median income, as published by FFIAC. Documentation to be submitted with the application includes the FFIAC census tract for all qualifying addresses, most current information for the tract's median income. An example of the documentation to be submitted is on this slide. Note that the highlighted tract's median family income shown in this scenario is above 100% and therefore it can be considered eligible. If completing a project located within Pennsylvania or West Virginia, you are eligible for 5 points. Projects in Delaware are eligible for 9 points. Applicants must actively request consideration for these points by answering yes, you wish to be considered in the online application. FHL Bank Pittsburgh will not award points if an application not request them. As mentioned before, even though a project may request points, points are not guaranteed and are subject for removal by FHL Bank Pittsburgh, who determines the final score. Some common mistakes we see on applications are listed on this slide. It is critical to slow down, plan ahead, thoroughly review the implementation plan, seek application assistance, and use your resources. We recommend having another set of eyes review the documentation prior to making the application final to ensure you have submitted all required elements as outlined in the implementation plan and actively requested the points you want us to consider for your application. We make determinations based on the information you provide within the application. If documents are unclear, forms are missing, third party signatures are missing, or costs are unclear, it may negatively affect the application. The second part of our review is called feasibility, and it is equally as important as scoring. A lot of times, applicants get very caught up in the scoring component of the application process, and then they overlook the feasibility requirements, but you need both to get an award. Before I go over the feasibility review process, I'd like to highlight a couple big changes from previous years. First is that we no longer look at the operating pro forma when determining need for subsidy. We are just looking at your gap according to your total development costs and other sources of funds. Second, projects with low income housing tax credits that comprise at least 40% of the permanent sources are not required to undergo an FHL bank feasibility review. In these cases, we rely on the underwriting performed by the State Housing Finance Agency. If you do not have a LIHTC commitment at the time of application and receive an AHP or voluntary housing grant award, we would require confirmation of the tax credit commitment and budget alignment at the time of disbursement. Let's talk more about our feasibility review process. During feasibility, we are going to look at your project and compare it to the specific feasibility criteria outlined in the implementation plan. We only complete a feasibility review on the highest scoring projects in the competitive running for the funding. We understand that the additional information we request can be a lot, but this information is what we need to truly know and understand the nuances of your project and to ensure the best use of our limited AHP dollars. So we ask that you respond as thoroughly and quickly as possible. If you score competitively, you will have the opportunity to address feasibility questions that we may have. For example, if you are outside of a guideline, you should be prepared with a reasonable answer with backup documentation if available and have that discussion with us. Remember, being outside of a feasibility guideline does not necessarily mean your project is ineligible, but it will certainly mean we are going to ask questions about it. You, as the project sponsor, should understand your project's feasibility analysis as part of your application submission process, meaning you should be viewing your project through our guidelines and reviewing the feasibility guidelines tab within the feasibility workbook. Ultimately, it is the decision of FHL Bank to make exceptions to feasibility guidelines to recommend to our board for approval. The bank will evaluate competing applications using the feasibility guidelines from the implementation plan. These guidelines are used as a benchmark for evaluating projects during application funding rounds and include a review of need for subsidy. Are your costs reasonable and have you secured sources to fund your project? Is there a gap between the two that AHP could fill? Cost reasonableness. How were the costs for your project determined? Are they reasonable? They meet our thresholds? We use cost reasonableness guidelines established on our website to help us guide this decision making. Ability to proceed. The bank will evaluate a project's ability to draw or secure funds within 12 months of award, meaning we will be reviewing site control, zoning clearance, environmental issues to make sure none of these items prevent the project from progressing forward in a timely fashion. Market demand for the project. Homeownership projects with 12 or more units and rental projects with 20 or more units must have a formal market study. For more detail here, including the project types that do not require a market study, review the implementation plan. Our implementation plan outlines projects that are exempt from formal market studies but will still need to demonstrate project need through third party documentation or as outlined in our implementation plan. Finally, development team capacity. The bank will evaluate the capacity of the sponsor and development team to complete and operate the proposed projects within FHL Bank's specific project milestone and timeline requirements. Every year, there are a few applications that score competitively high enough to be considered for funding, but during our feasibility underwriting process, they do not pass this portion of the review and therefore do not receive an award. Last year, this affected 10 projects. On feasibility review, FHL Bank may deem the project unfeasible, meaning it doesn't receive an award, require a subsidy or unit reduction to the project, or add conditions that must be satisfied prior to releasing any committed funding. Some common feasibility issues we see are unexplained high costs outside of our cost reasonableness guidelines. So proactively compare your costs to our thresholds and be able to explain your project and costs. For example, how they are typical or specific to your project area or type. Unexplained feasibility guideline issues. If you cannot provide a reasonable explanation for something outside of our feasibility guidelines, then it will not be approved. So it's important to be prepared to explain any project costs that don't meet our guidelines. Not able to proceed. A project must be ready to move forward and draw funds for incurred expenses within 12 months of approval. Changing financials during our feasibility review are a red flag. Makes us question if the project is really fully vetted now and ready to move forward. Rental projects need to demonstrate financial viability for at least 15 years. Does your project have substantial cash flow to support itself? Sponsors must explain their development team's experience with affordable housing development as part of the application as outlined on the sponsor experience form. All projects are required to be complete within 4 years and must incur eligible costs. and draw down their grant within 2 years to maintain compliance with our policies. So your experience form should explain how you will meet these timelines. Development teams with limited experience or sponsors with current compliance issues may be contacted by FHL Bank Pittsburgh for further information to confirm capacity to complete the project. If awarded, such projects may be conditioned to work with an experienced co-developer or be restricted from drawing down funds until certain project milestones are met. As outlined in the implementation plan, sponsors with limited capacity may have their subsidy request or unit count reduced at the sole discretion of FHL Bank Pittsburgh. The sponsor will be informed of any reductions prior to making an award. We recommend that you upload your financial feasibility workbook early on in the application process once the system opens. Uploading the document opens other questions within the system tailored to the information within your specific financials. So, how can you prepare for feasibility? The number one way to prepare for feasibility is to know your project in relation to the AHP feasibility guidelines. We have touched on each one of these points already, but make sure to have your team assembled and that they are ready to respond to feasibility reviewer questions and have documents ready that may be requested by the bank. This will help set you up for success. What is the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative? This year, the bank is providing an additional 17 million to support affordable housing development throughout the bank's district, which includes projects located in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. These funds, called the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative, can support the same types of projects under the Affordable Housing Program and can request the same limit, $1.5 million per project with a 150,000 per unit limit. There are some key differences between AHP and the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative. Whereas AHP is required by statute and the amounts available fluctuate each year based on the bank's prior year pre-AHP earnings, the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative is a discretionary offering of 17 million. AHP is eligible for projects anywhere our members do business, whereas the Voluntary Housing Grant is only available for projects in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Pennsylvania and West Virginia have a 3 project award per state minimum. Delaware has a 4 project award minimum. If there are not enough projects with a specific state to fund the minimum, then the remaining amount will be used to fund other in district projects. Projects awarded through the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative will follow the same scoring rules and feasibility guidelines that we covered earlier in today's webinar. Monitoring requirements will be similar with some exceptions, including the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative has its own subsidy agreement to execute different retention documents, although the terms remain the same, 15 years for rental and 5 years for owner-occupied for-sale projects. Owner-occupied rehabilitation does not have a retention requirement for AHP or the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative. Long-term monitoring for projects that receive voluntary housing grant funds will be limited to an annual certification of compliance. To streamline the process, anyone wishing to be considered for the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative must apply through the statutory AHP online application process. All projects will be considered for AHP until the AHP subsidy runs out. Then, remaining projects that do not competitively score under AHP that are located within the bank's district will be considered for the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative. So, there is no separate application process. So here are some key dates and next steps. The most important takeaway on this slide is to start as soon as possible. Information is already available on our website. This includes most of the forms and guides you will need to complete your application. Identify a member financial institution to talk about your potential projects or request assistance in finding a member, match, or sponsor by completing our match form on our website. The application assistance request window is currently open. This is when you can schedule time with a member of our staff to discuss your application and any questions that you have on scoring and feasibility. The window to request this assistance closes on May 23rd. Appointments are scheduled on a first come, first served basis. Outside of application assistance calls, we will not be able to answer questions related to scoring and feasibility. However, we are always available during business hours for technical issues. On June 26th, AHP Online will be open for application input. However, you can see all of the questions that you'll be asked by reviewing the Guide to Application Input, which is currently available on our website. Applications are due August 7th, and we will make the award announcements on December 11th on our website for both AHP and the Voluntary Housing Grant Initiative. To access our forms and other resources, please go to our webpage and click on the image that says AHP Forms and Resources. By clicking on the image, you will be directed to a page where you can access our forms, guides, and webinars. It's important that you review all of this information prior to your scheduled application assistance appointment so that you can have a productive conversation with our staff about your application's competitiveness. Our contact information is on this slide. We recommend using the general AHP email noted on the slide, as multiple staff monitor this inbox. Thank you for viewing this webinar and for all the work you do to support affordable housing.